The nutritionist said I should eat root vegetables. Said if I could get down 13 turnips a day, I would be grounded, rooted. Said my head would not keep flying away to where the darkness lives. The psychic told me my heart carries too much weight. So at $20, she'd tell me what to do. I handed the 20. She said, stop worrying, darling. You will find a good man soon. The first psychotherapist said I should spend 3 hours a day sitting in a dark closet with my eyes closed and my ears plugged. I tried it once, but couldn't stop thinking about how gay it was to be sitting in the closet. The yogi told me to stretch everything but the truth, said to focus on the out breath, said everyone finds happiness if they can care more about what they give than what they get. The pharmacist said Klonopin, Lamictal, lithium, Xanax. The doctor said an antipsychotic might help me forget what the trauma said. The trauma said, don't write this poem. Nobody wants to hear you cry about the grief inside your bones. But my bones said, Tyler Clemente dove into the Hudson River convinced he was entirely alone. My bones said, write the poem. To the lamplight, considering the riverbed, to the chandelier of your faith hanging by a thread, to every day you cannot get out of bed, to the bullseye of your wrist, to anyone who has ever wanted to die. I have been told sometimes the most healing thing we can do is remind ourselves over and over and over, other people feel this too. The tomorrow that has come and gone, and it has not gotten better. When you are half finished writing that letter to your mother that says, I swear to God, I tried, but when I thought I'd hit bottom, it started hitting back. There is no bruise. Like the bruise, loneliness kicks into the spine. So let me tell you, I know there are days it looks like the whole world is dancing in the streets while you break down like the doors of their looted buildings. You are not alone. And wondering who will be convicted of the crime of insisting you keep loading your grief into the chamber of your shame. You are not weak just because your heart feels so heavy. I have never met a heavy heart that wasn't a phone booth with a red cape inside. Some people will never understand the kind of superpower it takes for some people to just walk outside some days. I know my smile looks like a gutter on a falling house, but my hands are always holding tight to the ripcord of believing a life can be rich like the soil, can make food of decay, turn wound into highway. Pick me up in a truck with that bumper sticker that says it is no measure of good health to be well adjusted to a sick society. I have never trusted anyone with the pulled back bow of my spine the way I trust the ones who come undone at their throat, screaming for their pulse to find the fight to pound. 4 nights before Tyler Clemente jumped from the George Washington Bridge, I was sitting in a hotel room in my own town, calculating exactly what I had to swallow to keep a bottle of sleeping pills down. What I know about living is the pain is never just ours. Every time I hurt, I know the wound is an echo, so I keep listening for the moment when the grief becomes a window, when I can see what I couldn't see before through the glass of my most battered dream. I watched a dandelion lose its mind in the wind, and when it did, it scattered 1,000 seeds. So the next time I tell you how easily I come out of my skin, don't try to put me back in. Just say, here we are together at the window, aching for it to all get better, but knowing there is a chance our hearts may have only just skinned their knees, knowing there is a chance the worst day might still be coming. Let me say right now for the record, I am still gonna be here, asking this world to dance, even if it keeps stepping on my holy feet. You stay here with me, okay? You stay here with me, raising your bite against the bitter dark, your bright longing, your brilliant fist of loss, friend. If the only thing we have to gain in staying is each other, my God, that is plenty. My God, that is enough. My God, that is so, so much for the light to give. Each of us at each other's backs, whispering over and over and over, live. Live, live. Well, that woke me up this morning.
Okay, I know I'm supposed to say something now, but if there is one single poem, no matter how many times I hear you say it, and that brings me to my knees and infuses me with an unbelievable amount of hope, I think this is it. There are testimonials after testimonials on the YouTube comments on how some people have stopped and reconsidered taking their own life after hearing your poems. And you say, live, live, live. And this is why we're here today with Andrea Gibson in Poetry Reconsidered. Welcome to Vision Chats, where the only thing that matters is the future. Welcome, Andrea. Thank you for sharing your story today and helping us to reimagine our lives through the art, to the heart of spoken word. Andrea, you're the author of 6 books, winner of poetry slam competitions, have released 7 full-length albums that combine socially active spoken word pieces and musical collaborations. People are familiar with poetry and writing, but for those viewers who aren't aware of what spoken word means, how would you describe it?
Oh, great question. There are so many different ways to describe it. And I've thought about it a lot. I think everybody might describe it a little bit differently. But for me, it is the art of reading a poem out loud in a way that is true to the emotion that inspired the piece, in a way that is passionate and activated, and I would say honest. And I say honest because whenever anybody has ever said that I perform my poems, yes, that's true, but it never feels like a performance. It sort of feels like dipping into, way down deep into my heart and just pulling out the rawest emotion around that particular topic. And it's such a communal art form. It feels like it's a conversation, and it seems to me to be rooted in helping people know each other better, helping us know ourselves better, helping us understand the world around us better, and mostly through emotion. I've heard some poets that I love that aren't necessarily spoken word artists, but I've heard them read. And it is its own art form to learn how to convey your authentic emotion of the poem so that it really resonates. Maya Angelou said that an unspoken poem is a half-finished poem, and that's been argued, but it's always resonated a lot with me.
Yeah, and I have a PhD, right? Who in despite of that, I'm not even saying it in a way that's sounding elitist. I couldn't find a way to express myself. I didn't feel comfortable with like the scholarly expression. Like I couldn't understand poetry when I was growing up. Like I didn't understand, studied it in school. I thought it was way above my head until I landed on spoken word and I understood it and it spoke to me and I didn't feel like it needed to be scholarly. You know what I mean? You mentioned this before, like poetry, spoken word is community oriented, that the energy in the room provides you that energy to perform. And it feels like this dialogue between people. In many interviews itself, you've said that you fell in love with the art of spoken word, ironically around the time that you got your heart broken.
Yes.
Can you describe how it changed your life so much so that you decided to become a full-time poet?
Yes. So I grew up like with a lot of nervousness around speaking in conversation. Even an interview like this isn't natural for me. And so I think I was sort of, I was writing from the beginning because of that, because there was so much I had to express that I was struggling to express, in my daily life. So, but I never ever thought that I would be reading poems out loud because I have such, also in addition to that, I have such intense stage fright. But the first time I saw somebody perform spoken word on stage, I thought I have to do that. Like I have to find a way to do that because I loved it so much. I was so inspired. But I never thought I would be able to. And then I got my heart broken just shortly after that. And there was something about having my heart busted by, one of my first giant loves that made me feel like I had nothing to lose. And there's so if anybody out there has a busted heart right now, just know that can propel you into wonderful things, because it took away a little bit of my fear. And so I, just after spending an entire day, entire week crying, I went to an open mic and I got up on stage and I read a poem about her, actually. And it felt so healing, though I was shaking the whole time. I was, it was probably difficult for some people to watch how badly I was shaking. But after I did it, I was just still shaking when I sat down, and I thought, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And maybe because it scared me so much. I think that a lot of us, we try, and there are many other places in my life where fear will steer me away from something that I should be doing. But this one, I didn't, thank goodness, because it was the best decision I ever made to take that leap.
Yeah, my first time I decided to go to an open mic night at a popular spot, and I decided to write a piece, and this was just 2018. I decided to write a piece that I'd never even dared to mention or utter, story that I'd never uttered in my whole life. It was like carrying like a bag of rocks shackled to my body since I was 4 years old. And so growing up in India, to talk about like childhood sexual assault felt so shameful. So I wrote a piece. I told no one I wrote it. I knew no one as I walked up to the stage by myself, shaking, gagging, almost about to throw up in the back. And I somehow got to the stage, and the first thing to come out of my mouth was an apology about my foreign accent. I said, "Foreign accent alert." And the audience kind of like, they laughed. They were 99% black. And I was aware that I was the only South Asian person out there. And the audience kind of like laughed at that, awkwardly at that joke I was trying to make about my accent. Then I said the heavy piece, and mid-performance, I said a line, and this might be the only, like you said I should say my poem, this might be the only line I'd ever mention in this chat today. I said in that mid-sentence in my poem, I said, "And they wondered as I grew into my body and my curves took the shape of a woman, why I always brought wounded animals into my home. Broken dogs, broken birds, broken boys. Broken souls find broken souls they can fix so they can feel less broken." I said, and then the audience erupted into ums, ahs, finger snaps, and asked me to play that line back. And I think that was my moment. It was a moment where, as a person walking into a different space for the first time, I felt heard and accepted and uplifted and less alone. And for the first time, and most importantly, it felt like I was liberated from the shackles of the past. Not, I mean, mildly liberated. You don't work through trauma like that just through one piece. But I said my story. Without friends or family present, I wasn't alone though, because the community was there. I said my story that resonated with so many, not despite my accent and identity, but because of it.
Yeah, that story. I mean, you're reading those lines to me, and I've got goosebumps covering my entire body. That's such beautiful writing, and I understand why they asked you to read it again. And that it's wild because I've had similar experiences where there is something about the space or many spaces, most spaces that I've been through, where I've had stories where they were not ones that I had even told my best friends. And something about the container of art gives us further permission to tell our truths. And that's always surprised me. Like, why would I be more comfortable telling strangers these stories? But it really is impactful. And I love that story because that happens to me all the time as well. And the apologizing thing, I made a rule with myself. I always used to get up on stage and almost immediately apologize for something. And then I made a pact with my feminism a few years back where I wouldn't ever say sorry on stage unless I accidentally punched somebody when I was up there. Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? The second time I went up there, I apologized again, and then the host came out and called me out in front of everyone and said, "Never apologize for exactly who you are." And that, I think, was my wake up call. So much so that, now when students, and I work with a lot of international students in these populations, when they mention how it might be a barrier because they're from China or India, whatnot, I always tell that story because it's important for them to know that, I was apologizing for the longest time, but not anymore.
Yeah. Great. Me too.
Speaking about, identity and intersecting identities, I wanted to talk about your poem, Your Life, from the album Hey Galaxy. The video, which stars some of your own friends and has like different expressions of gender, living a vibrant, and what you describe as a genderful life. The
Yeah.
poem talks about, the line from your poem is, "You're happiest on the road when you're not here or there, but in between." And then you say, and you don't want a soft death, you want a hard life that is your life.
Mhm.
Can you share a little bit about what you mean by a genderful life and how you feel like you've finally found gender queer to be the right name for you?
Yeah, like there's a lot about my gender expression currently that's almost exactly how it was when I was, 7 years old. So, and then I went through this. As I grew and got older in high school, there were lots of ways that I was trying to conform to what would please other people. And then when I came out, I think around 20, I got to immediately sort of return to myself because for some reason being a tomboy or however we called it when I was young wasn't a big deal, but it seemed to be a big deal when I got older. But I think of gender as, for myself at least, a constant evolution, a constant becoming. When I'm writing about gender, I'm never writing down what I know. I'm writing to explore myself. It's almost like I'm on a journey, and typically I will write things and just be surprised. I'll think, I had no idea. I had no idea that was happening under the, and there it was. But I think, of course, there are moments where my gender expression brings up pain in my life. I would imagine most people, it finds its way to me because the world is as it is and has a lot of learning to do. But that poem in particular, I wanted to be a celebration. I wanted it to particularly inspire young people about their futures, about what is possible. And I wanted to make a video where I was showing all of these friends just living these beautiful creative lives in various gender expressions, and many of them living outside of the gender binary, because there's a lot of discourse in popular media about the pain and the struggle of it, but it's the best thing that's ever happened to my life. Sometimes I think, God, how would my life be if I were straight? And like not that straight folks can't have happy lives, but there's so many other doors that open to me in regards to my own learning and consciousness that I don't believe would have had I not been queer, because discovering that being queer made me question everything around me and try to find some answers for myself. So.
And I'm aware I'm asking you questions that have been asked to you before. I'm aware. I've seen the interviews. I've heard the podcast. But I think it's important to ask the question for the audience, here today, because I think the audience is learning as well what the terminology, genderqueer. I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are hearing it for the first time. In Out magazine, you tell the story about how you came out in a conservative Catholic college, and years later you went back to that same college to share some of your queerest poems with them. You said, and you said they had come a long way, making strides when it came to understanding what it meant to be queer. I wonder sometimes about people, our students from different cultures and intersecting identities, who are yet to find a pronoun or gender that feels right to them.
Mm.
What piece of advice specifically would you share with someone finding themselves in that position here, but somewhere across the world. I think of someone I know in India, for example, like how any pieces of advice that you might have for them.
Yeah, so as you know, I was doing an online writing workshop, and in that, people were sharing their pronouns, etc. But we had folks from, one workshop had people from 27 different countries in it, and so people are in different places in the world where it may or may not be, varying levels of safety, and even speaking about your gender, or even having an option to use a different pronoun. So, there are places where that is a threat to people's lives too. So it's different all around. What I tell my community here is to first do everything you can to find people to include in your life and to surround yourself with who celebrate you exactly as you are, and also who can hold space for who you might become, and how that person might be very different from the person that you are now, that they are now. And that was a key for me. Just finding and getting close with people that I knew would just celebrate me. And those were easy places to start to change my pronouns. I changed them from she to they. I don't know how long ago now, maybe about 8 years or so. And a harder place was the internet. Because there was a lot of people had a lot of attachment to seeing me a particular way, and then they thought it was a different me. It was never a different me, to use a different pronoun. It was still me. And then my close circle of friends, interestingly, were some of the harder people also, because a lot of my community is older. I'm friends with folks who are a generation older than myself. It's brand new to them to use pronouns, non-binary pronouns. And so those places were maybe the more painful, because the learning took a little bit longer. But they stuck with it. My dear friends, they stuck with it, and they messed up, and they messed up a lot, and they learned how to mess up in a graceful way, because all of us are constantly making mistakes. It's not the end of the world. If you mispronounce someone, it may be the end of something if you don't know how to show up to that with grace and try to do better.
Yeah. Right. I think one of your heroes is Leslie Feinberg, and then they said, "Gender is the poetry each of us makes out of the language we are taught." I was trying to figure out what that meant. I was wondering if you could explain that a little bit. Gender is the poetry each of us makes out of the language we are taught.
Yeah, and there are two different ways that I think Leslie had said it, but one was the language that we were taught, but also the language that we have been given. And the thing I love about that quote is it's constantly reminding me that if I give myself more language, if I use more creative language, then I'll probably have a better chance of landing on describing my gender or understanding my gender better. So what I take from that quote is gender and poetry. Like when you're working with both of those things, I feel so lucky to be someone who is constantly exploring my gender, but also is deeply interested in language, because those two things need each other a lot. And so I keep trying to give myself more language around my own gender. And the more I do, I understand it better. So we also learn more about we learn more about gender as we acquire more words. So as soon as, we started saying things such as genderqueer and non-binary and all of, we started to be able to see more. It was, it's like more words and you see better. So
yeah, thank you for that, and thank you, by the way, for also shining a spotlight on social media on the COVID crisis in India. I appreciated that personally.
Of course, yes, it's just absolutely devastating, and my heart has been aching about it. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And this has been an emotional year. Past year has been emotional. Then it, keeps adding on. Trauma keeps adding on to each other, on top of each other. Yesterday was especially emotional day for me. I was listening to your spoken word piece on the Orlando massacre, the Pulse nightclub, and I found myself sobbing. This was just yesterday. For someone whose family members could have been in that nightclub, the impact of those last moments of those who died hadn't truly, really sat in my soul until I heard you say it. So, I think of the 49 people who didn't survive, and I think of the daily trauma of the 53 who did survive. And I know writing can help process some of our past trauma, and that's actually my attempt to sort of heal from my own past. But there are stories and things that some of us have survived that we're terrified to visit and pen, let alone wanting to share it with others. What if I'm not ready to tell my story? What if I'm too afraid? What if I don't want my trauma to define me or be perceived negatively, like I'm not some sort of badass? How have you reached that place of feeling ready to speak your truth, say your piece, no pun intended? And what would you say to those who aren't quite ready?
Oh, this is great. I'm going to talk a little bit about this in the workshop as well, because I find it so important. But I have a friend, her name is Tara Hardy, and she's a poet. And years ago, she said to me, she challenged me to start writing the poems that I was terrified to write. She said that she could hear in my work that I was avoiding what I was afraid of. And when she gave me that advice, I didn't write for a year because I didn't want to write. I didn't want to write what I was terrified to write, but I also didn't want to waste my time writing anything else at that time. The first thing that I would say is if there's something that you feel would be healthy to write about or healing to write about, and you're not yet ready, be sweet with yourself about that, because timing, I think of timing as really connected to God and the universe and all of it, and that is important, that you speak or write about it at a time where it will actually be healthy to do so and not harmful. Something that I do when I encounter a topic that I'm not wanting to write about, I'll actually write why I don't want to write about it. And that can be, and it will just be my own little thing that I do in private. I don't share it with anybody, but I write down why I don't want to write about it. So that's a tip. And then let me think what else. It's always these different, all these different levels, because for me, I'm constantly searching for the thing in myself that I'm afraid to write. And sometimes it's simply one line. Like I don't want to say this one thing. And then I just get more intimate with why I don't. But then I'll do this thing where I'll think, okay, now, Andrea, you've written everything that you like. Maybe years will pass and I'll finally write that thing and I'll be so happy and I'll think all the scary things I finally wrote. And then more will surface and I'll think, no, I don't want to write that thing. But there has not been a case yet in my life where it wasn't, where it didn't feel liberating, where it didn't just feel truly liberating to finally speak the thing, especially if I have any shame that's circling it. My therapist says shame can't live in the light. So if I have this, sort of secret, I put it into a poem and I share it. It's almost like it takes the shame with it. The poem does. So yeah, it's so much to think and feel about. But I think the first thing I would say is be sweet with yourself and gentle and honor timing, because it's not always the right timing.
Yeah, yeah. I love when people quote their therapist. I do it all the time.
Yeah, I do it every
Therapist
day.
said,
Yeah.
yeah. It's been, it's been difficult, you said in an interview, I think, to talk about your chronic illness with Lyme disease. I watched your interview with your doctor and you discussed like the physical and mental effects of when you first tweeted it, when, mental effects of living with Lyme. And I'm was so sorry to hear about how incredibly hard it is. But you mentioned feeling most amount of hesitancy and even shame to talk about illness. Why was that topic so hard to talk about?
I think sort of like the thing that you were saying earlier, where you said, Oh gosh, now I'm forgetting exactly what it was, but I will remember it. It's so vulnerable to me. And I think that there is also, like, there are so many different things that I bring to a stage that a lot of people that I know don't. For example, tons of anxiety. So then I'm going to get up on stage and tell the audience I'm sick as well. It just, there is a way that I have to learn more about how to not identify those things in myself as a weakness. And it's so indoctrinated in us that sickness is weakness, or that it's failure, or anxiety is weakness. My God, my anxiety, there is nothing in my life that teaches me how strong I am, more than the fact that I have so much as much anxiety as I do, and still do what I do. But yeah, I think it's just the vulnerability. And then there's also a fear. So with Lyme disease, it's an illness that chronic Lyme disease is an illness that a lot of people don't believe in. And so it's a really especially vulnerable thing to get up and talk about having an illness that has impacted my life more than probably any other thing in my life, in the last, decade. And to talk about that, it just is so exposing. It truly feels like I'm taking off my clothes. And that's not the same for a lot of people. I have really great friends who are poets and activists that work a lot within the disability community around chronic illness. And poem after poem there is just so comfortable reading about their experiences being sick. Whereas, for me, if I were writing about sexual assault, for example, that would not bring up the same terror in me at all. But for them, it might. So it's different for all of us, what will scare us. I think we probably can trace it all back to our youth, some little thing that happened and then that caught. But yeah, and that's something that I feel grateful to finally be working on a lot more. The workshops that I was teaching this throughout the pandemic were helping me so much to finally just really break down why I'm afraid of talking about illness, and to have so many chronically ill people in the class, and have that push me further towards my own truth. Yeah.
I've been trying not to cry this whole time, by the way. Because I don't know why. So I've heard people call you inspiring. I've seen the fan comments on YouTube. Someone's like, "I hope Andrea responds to me," on YouTube comments. And I've seen people on Twitter respond. And I wanted to understand and sit with why I find you inspiring. The word inspiring is used so often. At 9 a.m. today, I was listening to you speak the piece with Mary Lambert on YouTube. And again, I started crying. And my partner was asking me, like, what's wrong? Why are you just randomly so emotional? And I thought about it. I think it came down to you embodying and personifying the word authentic. And so, it's my life goal, my work and my interactions with other humans to be authentic, so brave and so unapologetic. And again, to quote like Leslie Feinberg, strength like height is measured by who you're standing next to. So maybe knowing that I was having this out of body experience, talking to you today was a reason for my emotions. And I can see the audience also saying in the chat about strength and bravery and courage. And so I really want to thank you for just being Andrea.
Thank you. And also, it's hard, if you're ever around Mary Lambert, you would find it's very difficult to not be yourself, because she's just so authentic. And she's a friend who is like me, just crying all the time everywhere. And so I love her for it. Anytime she's in a space and we're in a space together, it's probably just going to be lots of tears.
And it's so therapeutic. And I say this, not in a reductive way. Tears are therapeutic, but it's okay to cry. That's a message if there are any students here as well. Like, it's totally, completely fine. Doesn't take away from being everything that you are. So your poems are personal narratives, but also social commentary, political activism. You speak about white feminism and you acknowledge privilege in the context of racial violence and after effects of the 2016 election. You also talk about gun reform in America, Reloading, a poem, and you say the words, you say, a country where we celebrate the independence of machine guns, how anyone can buy a cemetery at a sporting goods store on their 18th birthday and open carry it to an elementary school. As a mother of a black child who's terrified about the future, I appreciate you stating the facts like that, but what does it mean to you to use your platform as an activist? What is it like to keep speaking up on these topics despite, I imagine, plenty of pushback, especially between 2016 and 2020?
Yeah. Interestingly, the pushback comes so much more whenever I'm talking about guns and gun reform. That's when the scary comments start to come out on the out on the internet, and I'm like, I'm not reading the comments here. This is just too much. And even as you're reading that line, it's difficult for me. One of the recent shootings was at the grocery store where I shop at here in Boulder, Colorado. And so even hearing those lines, it's just so, it's so upsetting to feel into. That poem is, I don't know if I've ever read that poem without crying. And that's the case for some poems. It's just difficult to hear certain facts. Like that poem is full of facts. It's not even the writing that's making me sentimental as much as it is the actual stories. The fact that, like, of the 20 children murdered at Sandy Hook, not one of them went home in an ambulance because that's how dead they were. There was like no even questioning it. And so the facts of things can just be devastating. But I was raised by this. I was raised by a group of activists about a generation older than myself, in this group called Vox Feminista. And they were activists first, artists second, but they never made a piece of art that wasn't connected to trying to change the world. They were doing all different kinds of art. And I think had I not found them, I may have started writing and written mostly love poems, which is my favorite thing to write in the world. But I learned so much about that from them, about the responsibility of artists. And now if there's something to say, I can't not say it. In regards to pushback, you can't even think about that. There's so much feedback everywhere now. I also get a lot of pushback from, like folks in my radical community, which I listen to. There are some that I from, the machine gun crew, I don't listen to that feedback. But yeah, even talking about this stuff is hard to speak about. There's so much heartbreak in the world. And then there's so much to do, and always feels like there's not enough time to do it, but there certainly is if enough of us are doing it.
Yeah, well, activism can lead to burnout and fatigue. You've said it's hard not to get political, even when it comes to love. You've said love is political. You've said that. How do you recharge and take care of your sort of mental health? Your poetry is a gift to many others, in many other ways, to help break the isolation of mental illness. But how do you sort of take care of yourself?
Oh my gosh, that would take an hour to explain, but let me try to give you the cliff notes. So I do a lot of different, sort of weird things. I wake up every morning, and right when I wake up, I drink a glass of water and I dance. I dance especially if I'm miserable that morning. I'll do it. I'll make myself do it even more, because there's something about getting my heart rate up in a way that doesn't feel exercisey. It just feels fun. And I try to do that every single morning, especially when I'm on tour. I get outside as much as possible. I have 3 dogs now, and they're going to come with me to every single show I do, which is really annoying to the venue owners, but I need it for myself. My touring life looks probably a lot different than other people's, and we're not out partying at night and lots of dog walks during the day. There's something that for me, one of the things that helps me take care of myself the most is to take care of other things. So the more I have my puppies around, the less I'm thinking about, my myself. It helps me. It fills my heart with love. I meditate. I try to eat healthy, and I also try to, eat a lot of cake at the right time. All that stuff. And I read people. I listen to constantly listening to different meditations and breathing the air, and that's basically it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can attest to having a puppy daughter who I begged this morning. I said, "Come, I need you. Come, give me love. Come, give me hugs." So yeah, they're good for that too. Yeah, cuddles. So you're going back on tour now that things are opening up.
Yeah, I have a few shows coming up, but I'm going to start a larger tour, which I haven't announced anywhere yet. But I'll tell you and see if I get in trouble later. I have a new book coming out in November, and so I'm doing a large kind of world tour that will start around that book in November. But we'll start in the U.S. and then see where it's safe to go after that.
Come to Baltimore. Come to
Oh, I
Washington.
will definitely. I will. Yeah, yeah.
We had a question from the audience earlier. So the audience member said, in a recent study of college students, 91% reported moderate to high levels of stress, 38%, 39% reported severe anxieties, and 53% severe depression. And they say, I experience it, and they're an educator, and they say, I experience it with my students as well. I notice that many students unconsciously use some art to ease their anxiety, including drawing, writing, humming a melody, mimicking, and playing an instrument, etc. I think that educators should use some form of art while teaching students, such as maths, physics, chemistry, biology, to ease students' anxiety to demonstrate their care and empathy towards them. So they're saying, do you think art could be used purposefully in education to demonstrate empathy and kindness towards students? What steps would you recommend to take first in that direction?
Oh, wow. Okay. So let me see if I could start with the beginning of the question and say that I had a really, really anxious childhood. And then I had a few years in college, which interestingly weren't as anxious as the rest of my life was. But I feel so much when I go to universities and talk to students about having anxiety attacks or panic attacks in school. I can't imagine how difficult that is to be going through college and be having to deal with that amount of stress because it's so bad on the body. So anything that can be done in regards to, I mean, first of all, if there's any way to just convey to students that at the beginning of every class that they are not the only ones who are anxious, knowing you're not alone in something helps so much. And to have professors that would be willing to just acknowledge that, like, listen, this could get really stressful, and come to us if it does. One of the things, I don't know if this is a tip or not, but, and maybe I just, taught 5-year-olds for too long. I taught in a preschool for 5 years. But one of the things that I know, and the thing that helps me the most, is if I know I have access to my body, if I know that at any time I'm allowed to stand up or sit down on the floor and stretch, if I'm allowed to, if I know there's no, like, you're not going to be looked poorly at if you just walk out of the classroom, all of that stuff is so important, especially to people with a history of trauma, because to feel confined to a place can be re-traumatizing and very scary. So yeah, just freedom of body. And also the humming thing, like that, like humming helps me so much. So if I had a class where I was allowed to hum, so just that thing. But in regards to starting out with art, yes, like emotional expression is key, because the other thing is often the feeling, anything that is expressing art. Art gets to the heart of our emotions, I believe, every time. And what's amazing about that is we don't often know the feeling that we're feeling. Like, sometimes I'll think I'm anxious, but I'm really angry. Sometimes I'll think I'm angry, but I'm really sad. And so any art that you can incorporate to start moving those feelings, like as soon as you start feeling those feelings, if you feel them enough, then they move out. And then, it's just whatever. But I don't know if I'm giving any specific. I might be able to think of it in the workshop in terms of like, or I could send them to you later too, but just specific, welcome exercises that are artistic in classes where you just immediately create a safer and more welcoming classroom would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a student recently. They came in, they were saying, they were crying, they're sobbing, they suffer from, anxiety, depression, and they have two PhDs, by the way. They have two PhDs. And someone told them, you cannot be an academic because you have anxiety, and that was untrue. And so they were, lamenting about and crying about it. And at one point they said, no one knows what I've been through as a child. Like, there's this trauma, this trauma. I didn't know what to do at that moment. And I give people career advice. So I said, can I read you my poem? Which was my Broken Souls one. And I don't know, but we had a moment. I read it, and it was a moment. I can't describe it. I invited them to come today. I said, I'd love for you to come. I'm going to talk about this. There's so much transformation in people who other people perceive as like leaders or educators or professors or teachers, to be able to share openly and to be able to just go ahead and you tell your story. Speaking of which, you're about to teach us a workshop. Danielle, just put that in the chat today at 2 p.m. It's open to all Johns Hopkins folks about using poetry to reimagine your story. We have a question from the audience. What advice do you have for students who are inspired to pursue a career in writing and activism? I feel that sometimes a career as an author or writer are downplayed as a career option.
They definitely are. I never in a million years imagined I could grow up and be a writer. And I still can't believe it. I've been doing it for, 17 years professionally now, and I can't believe it happened. So I don't think anybody is really taught. I mean, some people maybe, but I was never taught that I could grow up and do it. And so what I know, and the only thing I know really, is to write all the time and read all the time. Read people whose writing you don't enjoy and get familiar with why you don't enjoy it and be able to articulate that. And yeah, for me, it is just doing the thing and then flooding myself with, just learning and never stop learning about it. Never think there's, you've gotten to a point where there's no more to learn. There's always so much more to learn. And then for me, it was key getting involved in communities of writers because we all have different skills, and then you learn different things from other people. And then things are sort of, if you have sort of a backup band of folks around you that are rooting for you, like you are rooting for them. That's been key for me. I had my very best friend when I had an opportunity to move on with an actual manager. I never imagined having a manager, but what it required was me leaving my job teaching to take this risk where I might not get paid anything for a couple of years. And I had my best friend in the world. I don't think that I would have done it had it not been for her, because it was too much of a risk. But my best friend in the world said I could live in her house for free until I was on, could start making a living from it. And that, without her, my goodness, it never would have happened. And so be around writers, be around people who root for you and support you, and constantly be taking new risks. Like, even if it's your first risk is writing the poem, maybe your second risk is going to an open mic, maybe the next time, it would be sharing a poem with your mother, which seems like it maybe would be easier than the crowd, but that's different for some people. That certainly was further down the road. For some of us. So that's the advice I always give on it, is do the thing and be around other people doing the thing.
Yeah, your other favorite poet, Mary Oliver, Oliver, said the most regretful people on earth are those who felt the call to creative work, who felt their own creative power restive and uprising and gave it neither power nor time.
Yeah.
Um, that's powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if she's ever said anything that wasn't just gorgeous and life altering.
Yes.
Yeah, she's just extraordinary. And it was her actually. She wrote this poem called The Journey years, one of her first early poems. And I discovered it, and that poem was why I came out. I wouldn't have come out had not, and this poem isn't about queerness at all. I mean, maybe it is in some ways, but I read that poem, and then I had to come out of the closet. Yeah.
Mm. She also said, "Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life." Right? Like that was my favorite. Like I didn't even realize who said it when I was quoting it all the time, especially in the context of how I am an educator, and when people want to ask what they want to do with their lives. You said you couldn't imagine another life besides being a poet.
No, no.
Yeah.
There was one moment, yeah, yeah. When I was a senior in high school, I wrote this paper that was the first paper that I was ever truly proud of.
Mm.
And I handed it to the teacher, and then the next day he called me out of class, and it had a big red F on the front of it. And he said that I didn't write the paper. And I just started bawling. I was screaming, and I'm like, I did write it. I did write it. I did write it. And I ran down to the principal's office still crying, and him still saying I didn't write it. But then when it finally came out that I wrote it, I thought, oh, if he didn't think I wrote it, then maybe I should do something with this. But I still thought, okay, I'm gonna go teaching. Like I teach English. I didn't know that I actually would be able to write, and I also didn't know that I would never have been a good English teacher, because I have friends who are teachers. A large part of my community are teachers, and that is its own art form. That is so. I mean, watching people, it's like watching, ballerina. It's such an art, and
Wow.
it's such a beautiful art. And I don't think of myself as having that skill in the same way. Like I'm just now beginning to learn. But when you watch somebody teach who is brilliant at it, it's like watching synchronized swimming or something. I love it.
Wow.
So I wish I had known early that I
Mm.
just didn't have the skill to teach, and I did have it to write. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and then, I wanted to explore a little bit. Sometimes when I go to the open mic nights, they'll introduce me as like a poet, like all of us who go up there and it's like poet, poet. And I feel like such a fraud, like I cringe. I'm like, I'm not a poet. I wrote like a couple of pieces, but then someone else had said, totally, you should write a book, totally, go for it. You are a poet. Who is a poet? Like what constitutes a poet?
It's funny, isn't it? I felt that. I mean, I think I had been touring around the world professionally for 5 years and still uncomfortable calling myself a poet. I think anybody who feels like a poet and writes poems is a poet. But I also, I have songwriters in my life who are some of my favorite poets. They don't write poems, but they write song lyrics that just, blow my mind. And yeah, so I definitely claim the poet, definitely claim that word. It was a fun day, I think, when I finally claimed it for myself, because I'd be on an airplane and people would say, so what do you do? And I say, oh, I'm a poet. And they'd laugh. I mean, nobody's really a poet. But yeah.
Yeah, okay. A poet's anyone who writes poetry. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
yeah, okay. I will claim that. I'll try. I
yeah.
think I just have to go through like the imposter fears of thinking my writing means anything.
Yeah.
Who am I writing for? That's the question. And you've talked about your creative process includes just walking around the house, making sounds, and then filling in the words later. Is that typical? Like, is that how these masterpieces are sort of crafted?
There's a poet named Saul Williams where I once heard an interview, and but it was just a little short blip of an interview where I gathered that he may write in the same way, but I don't know for sure. Hopefully someday I'll talk to him and ask him, because I've never heard anybody else who does this. But yeah, I pace the house and I make a lot of sounds that aren't actual words, because I want to know the sound of the piece before I write it. I want to feel like I want the emotions to find their sounds, and then I find the words later. So yeah, as I've said in different interviews, if anybody ever walks in on it, it's quite embarrassing, because I can't imagine how it looks, but it certainly looks and sounds weird.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, I was asked to write a piece called on hope for December, like the holidays. Someone asked me to come do a stage show and write a piece on hope. And at that point, I was feeling the most hopeless. Like, there was a lot of things going on with my family, the pandemic, health, whatever. And I couldn't come up with anything. I had the computer open. I think usually I'm a paper writer. So I had the computer open and sat there a whole weekend, locked myself up in a room. I don't know what to write. It's not coming. It's not coming. Then I decided to just not do anything and listen to Andrea Gibson on Spotify. And I just listened. And then the next morning at 4 a.m., I woke up and then it just started coming out. You've mentioned that before too, like being inspired by others when you write. Does that still happen, or is that like early poet inspiration?
Yeah, and first of all, any hopeful poem you've ever heard of mine is most likely written when I was hopeless. So I hardly ever write where I am. I write where I want to, the direction I want to go in. So a lot of my happiest poems were written when I was most miserable, trying to use the poem as sort of a rope to pull myself up a bit. And in regards to being inspired by other writers, that still is happening. Like you've probably heard me say that I've heard my actual style change from year to year, depending on who I was reading or who I was listening to that year. And that still happens for sure. I still find that. I was writing, this last book I was writing, I could hear various other poets all through my work in that book. And it's almost always just influenced by who I've been taking in the most of recently.
Yeah, that's happened to me as well. With that, Andrea, I'd like to wish upon you many, many, many years of creating pieces of art to share with us. This conversation has been enriching to my soul, and I'm certain others have felt the same way as well. This is Vision Chats. The only vision that matters is the one you create. Andrea, I believe you're going to end us with one final piece. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Stick around for Andrea's final piece.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to read a poem called Boomerang, Valentine. And it was inspired by an artist activist named Sonia Renee Taylor, who started a movement called The Body Is Not an Apology. I really recommend checking out everything that she's doing. I'm sitting on my friend's couch several months into being intentionally single and celibate for the first time since I was 20 years old. 20 years old when I believed sex had to involve a dude and the word screw. I'm telling my friend about the psychic who said, I'm going to meet the love of my life by the end of January. It's January 10th, and I am so far from ready for Cupid, that naked little shit, to fire anything sharp my way. So far from ready to be the kind of unhinged only love makes me. My friend musters every bit of new age jargon she can fit onto her tongue and says, well, what if you are the love of your life? I think, oh my God, I hope that's not true, because I am absolutely not my type. But let's say for a moment I am. Let's say I am my dream girlish boy, and I'm standing on my front step, ringing my own doorbell, waiting for me to answer so I can hand myself a mason jar full of water lilies I have rescued from a millionaire's Monet. Let's say I am so charmed by the radiance of my own anarchy, I invite myself in for tea, and when I'm not looking, I sneak the steam from the kettle into my pocket so the next time I am missing the coast of Maine, I can gift myself the fog. Let's say I'm not just running my mouth around an old cliche that says we gotta love ourselves. We don't. I know I can keep getting down on myself till I'm tucked in my grave, looking up at my name carved in stone, wondering why I never knew I'd been cast for the lead in my own life. When it comes to love, the only thing I'm certain of is you are the best thing that has ever happened to you. Whoever you are, you're a quitter, great. There's plenty worth quitting. A sore loser, who isn't? You got no discipline? Maybe discipline is for bodybuilders and closeted gay monks. Picture a magician, so attached to being perfect, he cuts off his own legs just to pull off the trick. Picture the 738 selfies I deleted before I took one I was willing to show to the world. Picture me wishing I could have all of those back. My so-called flaws in stacks like baseball cards I know will be worth something someday, like compassion, like tenderness, like my capacity to think myself a catch just because I've never seen a chandelier I didn't want to swing from. On days I have hard time keeping warm in my own weather. I imagine what the flower said to the first human trying to name half its petals love me nots. No, that is not how anything grows. Of all the violence I have known in my life, I have not known violence like the way I have spoken to myself. And I've seen almost everyone around me hold that same belt to their own back, an ambush of every way we have decided we are not enough, then looking for someone outside of ourselves to come clean that treason up. If I were to ask myself out of that cycle, I might say, listen, I am still going through my growth spurt. I am still yet to get my worst tattoo. I am still clearing the smoke from burning the toast I wrote for my own wedding day. I am still trying to get rid of my mirror face, look myself dead in the eye. I know Facebook is a lousy mortician, desperately trying to make us all look more alive. I know there are things I haven't survived. I know there are people in the world who have been through hell with me. I don't ever want to take that lightly, but I want the heavy to anchor me brave, to anchor me loving, to anchor me in something that will absolutely hold me to my word when I tell Cupid I intend to keep walking out to the tip of his arrow, to bend it back towards myself, to aim for my goodness, till the muscle in my chest tears from the stretch of becoming what I came here to be. A lover of whatever got covered up by the airbrush, the truth of me, that beauty of a beast, chewing through the leash till I get a mason jar full of water lilies and I got a kettle full of sea. And my whole life is just a boomerang valentine coming right back